I swear it was supposed to be just another boring grocery run. I was standing in the frozen aisle, staring at bags of peas like I was choosing a life path, mentally ticking off my list and wondering if I'd forgotten Jack's favorite cereal again. The air smelled faintly like bleach and coffee from the little cafe near the entrance, and there was that low supermarket hum, carts squeaking, beeps at the registers, kids whining somewhere behind me. I was already thinking about dinner, about how Jack had said he was craving pasta that night, and how we were supposed to sit down later and talk about our Europe trip. Everything felt so normal, so painfully ordinary, that it almost feels like a joke now. Then I heard my name in that half-surprised, half-delighted tone people use when life throws them someone from a different decade. She called me Unome like she wasn't sure it was really me, and when I turned around, it took me a second to place her. It was Lily, from college. My Lily from all-nighters and cheap wine and shared heartbreaks. She was standing there with a basket hooked in her arm, hair shorter, little lines around her eyes that matched mine, but the same warm smile. She said she couldn't believe it had been more than 10 years, and she laughed that we had gone from sticky bar floors to comparing prices on laundry detergent. We started catching up right there between the frozen pizza and the diet yogurt. She asked how life had been, and I said it had been busy and messy and good, grown-up good. I told her work was fine, nothing glamorous but stable, and that Jack and I were still together. I said we were actually planning a trip to Europe at the end of the year, something we'd been dreaming about forever. She smiled at first, but then her expression shifted, like someone had hit pause inside her head. She said she was really sorry to hear Jack and I had split up and that she'd assumed I was already over it. I laughed, and said she must be mixing me up with someone else, because Jack and I were fine and still very much in love. That was the exact moment I watched the color start draining from her face as she said she needed to tell me something she wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Lily's lips parted like she wanted to swallow her own words, but it was too late. The worry was all over her face. She lowered her voice, even though no one was listening, and said she didn't think I knew that she had actually seen Jack about 3 weeks ago. She kept glancing at me, almost wincing, as if she were bracing for the moment my world cracked open. She said she'd spotted him in a restaurant on Westwood Street, sitting in one of those corner booths, the ones people choose when they don't want to be seen. And then she added the part that made my stomach twist. He wasn't alone, Anna. There was a blonde woman with him. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her basket, guilt written everywhere. I felt this strange floating sensation, like my mind refused to let the words sink in. I asked her if she was sure, really sure, and she shook her head quickly, saying she knew exactly what she saw. She pointed out that scar on Jack's cheek, the one he got when he fell off his skateboard at 21, the one I used to trace with my thumb when he was lying on my chest. She said that's how she knew it was definitely him. And in that moment, with the cold air brushing my legs and the hum of refrigerators around us, something inside me buckled. It was like someone had reached into my chest and pulled the floor out from under my ribs. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud and uneven, drowning out everything else. I think Lily realized just how deeply she'd hit me, because she reached out and touched my arm gently, whispering that she hadn't meant to hurt me. But I couldn't breathe. Every inhale felt sharp, like there wasn't enough air in the entire supermarket. The aisle suddenly felt too narrow, too bright. Even the colors on the packages seemed wrong, distorted, almost mocking. I told her I needed a second, that I needed to get some air, and she nodded, eyes wide with regret. I walked away without even remembering to say goodbye, leaving my half-filled cart behind. It took every ounce of strength not to collapse right there between the frozen dinners and the discount pastries. I barely remember how I made it out of the store. One moment I was pushing through those sliding doors, and the next I was standing in the parking lot, blinking against the harsh afternoon light like I'd woken up in the wrong life. My hands were shaking so badly that my keys jingled like loose coins in a jar. Every step toward my car felt heavy, disconnected, as if I were watching myself from somewhere outside my body. And when I finally slipped into the driver's seat, the silence inside the car hit me like a punch, thick, suffocating, too honest. It was the first place where the truth had enough room to echo. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind kept replaying Lily's words, looping them, twisting them, breaking them apart, and putting them back together. 3 weeks ago, a blonde woman. A restaurant he never mentioned. Jack's scar. The scar I've kissed 1,000 times. The thought of him sitting there with someone else, smiling, talking, maybe touching her hand, made my throat burn. I felt this raw mixture of disbelief and humiliation, like I'd been the only one in the world who didn't know my own story had changed. I asked myself if I'd missed signs, if I'd been stupid. If I'd been so in love that I'd gone blind without even noticing the darkness settling in. My phone buzzed once with a reminder about the pasta ingredients I'd meant to pick up, and that simple vibration broke me in a way I didn't expect. I dropped my forehead against the steering wheel and exhaled shakily, the sound too close to a sob. I whispered, barely able to hear myself, if he lied about this, what else has he been lying about? And that question, that quiet, dangerous question, didn't stop at all. It settled somewhere deep inside me, sharp and waiting. I sat there for a long time, staring through the windshield without really seeing, knowing that when I drove home, nothing would feel like it used to. Something fundamental had shifted, and even though I couldn't name it yet, I could already feel the fracture running through the center of my life. When I finally pulled into our driveway later that afternoon, the house looked exactly the same. Quiet, warm, familiar. But I wasn't the same woman who had left it that morning. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself I could walk inside without falling apart. The worst part was how automatic everything felt. Unlocking the door, kicking off my shoes, hanging my purse. My body knew the choreography of my life, even if my heart had been knocked off rhythm. I could hear Jack humming faintly from the kitchen, the same little tune he always did when he was chopping vegetables. A sound that used to soften me now sent a cold ripple down my spine. When I stepped into the kitchen, he looked up with that easy smile he always saved for me. So effortless, so natural, so impossibly convincing. He said he was glad I was home early and joked that maybe I'd missed him. I watched him move around the counters, slicing tomatoes, flipping through a recipe book like it was any other day. And for a split second, I almost let myself fall into the comfort of it. Almost. But then I noticed his phone on the counter, face down, like it always was lately. I noticed how he tensed for half a second when he saw me glance at it, just enough to light a warning in my gut. And suddenly Lily's words were loud again, louder than his humming, louder than my heartbeat. I forced a smile, one I hoped didn't tremble, and told him the store had been crowded and I'd forgotten half the things on my list. He laughed and said it was fine, that he could handle dinner. He even kissed the top of my head as he walked past, a gesture so gentle it made my chest ache. It was surreal, acting normal while something inside me was unraveling thread by thread. I could feel myself slipping into observation mode, like I was watching him from behind a glass wall. Every movement, every glance, every pause felt suspicious, like clues waiting to be decoded. And while he stirred the sauce and talked about office gossip, I stood there smiling, nodding, pretending I was still the woman who believed every word that left his mouth. As the evening went on, that glass wall between us only grew thicker. Every time he spoke, I found myself dissecting his tone, noticing little things I'd brushed off before, how quickly he changed subjects, how he never let conversations linger too close to anything personal. When he told me he might have to work late again that week, he said it casually, like he was talking about picking up milk. But there was a tiny hesitation, almost invisible, a micro pause I felt more than heard. And suddenly I remembered Lily saying, 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, when he'd told me he'd been stuck in back-to-back meetings. The dates lined up like puzzle pieces clicking into place, and I felt a chill run through me. While he showered after dinner, I found myself pacing the bedroom, running my hands through my hair because the silence was too loud. His phone buzzed once on the nightstand, just a single vibration, and the screen lit up with a notification preview that disappeared before I could read the name. But I caught the tail end of it. A heart emoji. One heart, small, pink, innocent-looking but sharp enough to cut skin. I froze, literally froze, like my brain didn't know what to tell my body to do. He'd been leaving his phone face down for months, saying he didn't want screens to interrupt us. And for so long, I'd believed him. I'd even found it sweet. Standing there now, staring at that dimmed screen, I felt like a fool, like someone who'd been applauding the magician while he was using her own watch for the trick. When he came out of the bathroom, hair damp, smelling like that eucalyptus body wash I always bought him, he smiled and asked what I'd been thinking about. And I swear for a heartbeat I almost said everything. I almost asked him who the blonde was, why he lied, why he thought I'd never find out. But something stopped me, some instinct deeper than fear, something colder and steadier than pain. I told him I was just tired, that work had drained me, and he pulled me gently into his arms. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. It felt like being held by a stranger wearing my husband's skin. And as his chin rested on my hair, I stared over his shoulder at the nightstand where his phone lay still and silent, and I made myself a quiet promise. I would not confront him until I knew the whole truth. That night, long after Jack fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. It was strange, comforting and infuriating all at once. He slept like a man with a clean conscience, a man who believed he was safe, loved, unquestioned. Meanwhile, my mind was running in circles, replaying every odd moment from the past months. The sudden, late meetings, the new cologne he claimed a coworker recommended, the way he'd started showering as soon as he came home, saying he felt gross from the office. Back then, none of it had seemed alarming. But now, with Lily's trembling voice still echoing in my head, each detail felt like a breadcrumb leading straight to a truth I wasn't prepared to face. I eventually turned onto my side, watching the faint light from the street lamp slip through the blinds and paint thin silver lines across the room. I closed my eyes, trying to steady the storm inside me, when suddenly Jack mumbled something in his sleep. At first it was just incoherent noise, that half-speech people make when they're dreaming. But then he said it again, clearer this time. A name, a woman's name, a name I'd never heard him say before. My blood turned cold, my body stiffened. For a moment, it felt like the universe had whispered the truth straight into my ear. I waited, barely breathing, hoping I'd misheard him, but he said it again. Softer, like a secret he'd been holding under his tongue. I pressed a hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. The sound of that name broke something fragile inside me, something I didn't even know was holding me together. I stared at him, the man I'd shared a decade of memories with, the man I'd loved with every honest part of me, and I felt a new kind of hurt, one that didn't explode, but spread slowly, steadily, like ink bleeding through paper. That was the moment I understood I couldn't rely on trust anymore. I needed proof, cold, undeniable proof. And as I lay there in the dark, my tears drying on my cheeks, I quietly decided that I would find it, even if it destroyed everything I thought my life was. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out the inside of my chest and left nothing but echoes behind. Jack was already up, humming in the kitchen again, moving around like a man with absolutely nothing to hide. I watched him from the hallway for a long second. His easy posture, the casual way he reached for the coffee mug, the little sigh he made when the toast popped up. It all felt rehearsed, too normal, too practiced. And the more I watched, the more I felt this slow, icy determination rising inside me. If he'd built a second life behind my back, then I deserved to know exactly what that life looked like. No more blind love, no more assumptions. I needed the truth, not the version he fed me. So I started planning. Not dramatically, quietly, methodically, like someone assembling the pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve but had no choice but to finish. I told him I was thinking about visiting my sister on the weekends again, just to clear my head. He smiled and said it was a great idea, that I deserved some rest. He even kissed my cheek and told me to have fun. The irony tasted bitter. He had no idea I wasn't going anywhere near my sister. Instead, I spent that first weekend driving circles around town, figuring out the best vantage points near his office, timing the flow of people coming and going, learning which streets offered cover and which didn't. I hated myself for doing it, hated the sick, tight feeling in my stomach. But the need for answers was stronger than the guilt. The first day, nothing happened. Just him leaving work late, tired, alone. I almost convinced myself that Lily had been mistaken, that maybe the blonde was a coworker, maybe the whole thing was an innocent misunderstanding. But that night, lying beside him again, that woman's name replayed in my head like a curse. The second day, I followed him again. Nothing. Boring. Predictable. But my instincts told me to keep going. Told me betrayal rarely shows itself on a schedule. So I kept watching, kept waiting, kept swallowing my fear. By the time the third weekend rolled around, I felt like two different women. The one at home pretending everything was fine, and the one in the shadows, holding her breath, hoping the truth would finally step into the light. On the third attempt, everything in my gut told me not to blink. I parked on a side street near his office, angled just enough to see the front entrance without being obvious. My heart was pounding in this slow, heavy rhythm that made my ribs ache, and I kept wiping my palms on my jeans because they wouldn't stop sweating. For a while, it was the same old routine. Employees leaving in waves, the sun dipping lower, the sky turning that muted orange you only get in early autumn. I was already bracing for another dead end when I saw him. Jack walked out of the building, not in his usual exhausted slump, but with this unmistakable lightness in his step. He checked his phone, smiled at it, smiled, and then looked around like he was waiting for someone. That was the moment my breath caught in my throat. A woman appeared from the corner of the block, moving toward him with a confidence that made my stomach twist. Blonde, exactly like Lily had said. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, catching the fading sunlight. She wasn't dressed like a coworker, more like someone meeting a lover. Fitted coat, soft makeup, that casual elegance people wear when they want to be noticed but not obvious. Jack's whole face softened when he saw her. He leaned in without hesitation and kissed her, slow, familiar, practiced. Not the cautious, restrained kind of kiss someone gives when they're unsure. This was the kind you give when the relationship already has history. My chest tightened so abruptly I had to grab the steering wheel to steady myself. I felt this hot wave of humiliation wash over me, followed immediately by a cold clarity that surprised me. It was almost like watching a stranger through binoculars, not my husband. I expected to cry or scream or break apart, but instead, I felt myself going eerily still. Numb in the way people talk about during car accidents, present but detached. They stood there talking for a bit, close enough that their shoulders touched, comfortable enough to laugh together. When she slipped her hand into his arm, he didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned closer. I forced myself to stay quiet, stay hidden, stay steady. The truth was right there, unfolding like a scene I'd never been meant to witness. And instead of collapsing, I found myself memorizing everything: her height, her smile, the way he looked at her like she was something he'd been starving for. My heart was splintering, yes, but beneath the cracks, something else was growing too. Something sharp, something calm, something dangerously focused. I didn't know what I was going to do next, not exactly, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Not like this. I needed more than the sight of a kiss. I needed every piece of the truth he tried to hide. They eventually walked toward a small cafe across the street, the kind of cozy place with dim lights and soft music, the kind of place Jack and I used to go to when we were first dating. Watching them step inside felt like someone had reached into my chest and twisted something vital. I waited a minute before slipping out of my car and crossing the street, careful, quiet, every nerve on fire. I didn't go inside. I didn't have to. The front windows were wide and clear, offering a perfect view of the intimate little table they chose near the back. They sat close, leaned in, whispered. I could see her laughing softly at something he said, and then, just when I thought my heart couldn't break any further, I watched him reach across the table and take her hand, thumb brushing over her knuckles the exact same way he used to with mine. I don't know how long I stood there staring through that window, maybe a minute, maybe an hour. Time didn't make sense anymore. The cafe lights flickered off the glass and blurred around their silhouettes, making the whole scene look like something out of someone else's life. But it wasn't. It was mine. Or at least the part of my life he'd carved out without me. As I watched them talk, their heads almost touching, I could feel pieces of myself falling away. Trust, memories, all the little certainties I'd built my marriage on. When he leaned in and murmured something into her ear, she pressed her hand over her heart like she was flattered, touched, special. And that hurt the most. He used to make me feel that way. Now he was offering that tenderness to someone else, like our years together were nothing more than expired currency. I walked back to my car in a daze, my legs trembling but my mind terrifyingly clear. I didn't cry, not then. I didn't scream or call him or storm into the cafe demanding answers. Instead, I sat behind the wheel, hands shaking, and whispered to myself that what I'd just seen was enough to shatter my marriage, but not enough to build my revenge. Not yet. If I confronted him now, he'd lie, twist the truth, apologize, perform, maybe even gaslight me into doubting my own eyes. I knew him well enough to know he was capable of that. So I wiped my face, steadied my breath, and made a silent promise to myself. I would gather everything, every lie, every secret, every detail, piece by piece, and when the moment came, I would make sure he regretted underestimating me. The morning after I saw them together, something in me felt different. Not healed, not calm, just sharper. Like the pain had burned away the fog and left only cold precision behind. Jack acted the same as always, kissing my cheek, asking if I slept well, rambling about some meeting he had later. I watched him move around the kitchen, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending he wasn't living two lives. For the first time, instead of feeling sick or heartbroken, I felt something steadier settle into my bones. Resolve. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. I wasn't going to be the naive wife he expected. If he was playing a game behind my back, fine. He just didn't realize I was learning the rules. So I started documenting everything. It began subtly. Receipts he left in his jeans pockets, the dates he claimed he was working late, screenshots of shady notifications that popped onto his phone, even the tone he used when he talked about certain coworkers. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Insurance, hidden under layers of files only I knew how to navigate. My hands shook the first time I placed a photo in it, one I took from my car, showing Jack leaning close to that blonde outside the cafe. Seeing it saved there, frozen in pixels, made the betrayal feel solid and undeniable. But with each new piece of evidence, I found myself standing a little straighter, breathing a little deeper. The truth was ugly, but it was mine now, and I was going to use it. Within a week, I made the appointment I'd been avoiding, a lawyer. I told Jack I had a dentist appointment, and he didn't question it. He didn't question anything anymore, maybe because he assumed I was too wrapped up in our daily life to look beyond it. I sat in that quiet legal office, hands twisted in my lap, and explained everything. Every suspicion, every lie, every confirmation. The lawyer didn't blink. She listened, took notes, and then laid out options I hadn't even imagined. Options that didn't just end the marriage, but protected me, secured my future, and, if executed correctly, left Jack absolutely blindsided. Hearing her speak felt like inhaling fresh air after being underwater too long. For the first time since the supermarket, I felt a spark of something like power flicker alive inside me. Over the next few days, I became two versions of myself. There was the Anna he expected, the soft-spoken, predictable wife who asked about his day, made dinner, folded laundry, and kissed his cheek goodnight. And then there was the other Anna, the one he didn't know existed, the one who moved carefully, thought strategically, and collected evidence with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose. At night, after Jack fell asleep, I'd slip out of bed as quietly as a shadow, sit at my desk with only the small lamp on, and review everything I'd found. Dates, locations, screenshots, statements from the lawyer, drafts of documents. It was sickening, but it was empowering too, like fitting together the pieces of a puzzle he never expected me to solve. Meanwhile, at home, I kept my distance. Not enough for him to suspect anything, but enough for him to notice the shift. He'd glance at me sometimes with this faint confusion, like he sensed something was off but couldn't put his finger on it. He'd ask if I was stressed or tired, and I'd smile gently and say things like, "You always told me I overthink. I'm trying not to." He'd nod, seemingly satisfied, and go back to whatever lie he was living. Every time he walked past me with his phone in his pocket, I would feel that familiar sting in my chest, but instead of breaking me, it fueled me. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't in the dark. And the more he tried to act normal, the more I realized how deeply he underestimated me. One evening, as he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, I watched him from the doorway. His face lit up briefly, too briefly for him to realize I'd seen it. A message. From her. I could tell by the way his lips twitched into a small private smile, the kind you only give someone you crave. He locked his phone instantly, like the moment had slipped, and looked at me with this innocent expression that almost made me laugh. He had no idea that the locks, the secrecy, the little habits he thought were invisible were painting the entire picture for me. I kept my voice soft when I asked if he wanted tea. He said yes, and when I turned toward the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked tired, older, sure, but there was something new in my eyes, something steely. Something that told me I was done simply surviving his betrayal. I was preparing for the moment he'd finally see everything I already knew. The day I finalized the plan with my lawyer, everything inside me shifted into place, like the last domino tipping, quiet but decisive. She handed me a neatly organized folder containing all the documents we would need, along with a step-by-step outline of how things would unfold once I chose the moment. I remember holding that folder against my chest as I walked back to my car, feeling both fragile and frighteningly powerful. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the blueprint of my freedom. And knowing I had it tucked safely away felt like a shield no one could see. On the drive home, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what I was preparing to do. I wasn't the same woman who had crumbled in the supermarket. I was someone else now, someone who could look betrayal in the eye and not back away. At home, I slipped seamlessly back into my familiar routine. I chopped vegetables for dinner, wiped down the counters, and hummed softly under my breath, mirroring the exact calm he always tried to project. Jack came into the kitchen behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist like he had 100 times before. But instead of warmth, I felt nothing. Just the brush of his hands, the faint scent of his cologne, the weight of the lie pressed against my back. He asked if everything was okay, if I'd been quiet lately. There was a note of worry in his voice, something uncertain, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear, like a tiny crack in the mask he'd worn so well. I told him gently that I was fine, just tired. He believed me. Of course he did. Jack always thought silence meant ignorance, not strategy. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay beside him with my eyes open, replaying the plan in my mind. Every detail, every step, every moment where the truth would finally catch up to him. I imagined the look on his face when he realized I knew everything, when the carefully built house of lies collapsed all at once. And strangely, instead of dread, I felt calm. Cold, steady calm. The kind you feel right before making a decision that will change your life forever. I turned my head and studied his sleeping profile, the familiar curve of his cheek, the faint shadow of his lashes. It struck me then that the man I loved wasn't the man lying next to me. That version of him existed only in memories. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that the next time he betrayed me, I would be watching. I would be ready. And he would have no idea his downfall had already begun. I chose a Friday night on purpose. The same day of the week he always claimed to have late meetings. The day that had become a quiet trigger in my chest. He left the house with the usual routine, a quick kiss on my forehead, a rushed "don't wait up," and that faint scent of his cologne trailing behind him. I watched him walk to his car from the living room window, my fingers tightening around the curtain edge. The moment his taillights disappeared down the street, I exhaled slowly, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from anticipation, from the knowledge that tonight wasn't just another night. Tonight was the unraveling. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the slim folder that had become my secret weapon. The drive across town felt surreal, like I was drifting through someone else's life. The city looked different under the streetlights. Quieter, colder, somehow complicit. When I reached the restaurant, I didn't park directly across from it. I chose a spot 2 blocks down, tucked beside an apartment building where I had a clear view but wouldn't be noticed. My heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my throat. For a moment, I closed my eyes and reminded myself why I was here. Not for drama, not for closure, but for truth, for evidence. For the final piece that would allow me to walk away without doubt or hesitation. And then, right on cue, Jack arrived. He stepped out of his car looking freshly groomed, energized, almost excited. I watched him check his reflection in the window, smoothing his hair, adjusting his shirt, small acts of vanity I hadn't seen him bother with for me in months. A few minutes later, she appeared. The blonde. Coat cinched, hair perfect, eyes bright with expectation. She approached him with a smile that reached her cheeks, and he pulled her into an embrace that lasted just a little too long to be innocent. My stomach tightened, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. Not anymore. I angled my phone, hit record, and captured the exact moment he kissed her like she was the center of his world. They headed inside the restaurant hand in hand, like a couple with nothing to hide, nothing to fear. I followed at a distance, slipping into the lobby just long enough to see where the hostess guided them. They were seated near the back, tucked into one of those intimate booths meant for whispered conversations and lingering touches. I didn't sit inside. Not yet. I found a spot outside the window, half shielded by a planter, where I could see just enough without attracting attention. From there, the scene unfolded like a cruel parody of all the nights Jack and I used to spend together. He looked alive, animated, laughing in that soft, teasing way he hadn't used with me in months. She leaned closer every time he spoke, twirling a strand of her blonde hair around her finger, soaking up every word. At one point, he reached across the table, brushing her hand gently with his thumb, the gesture that had once meant comfort, affection, promise. Seeing him give it to her felt like a knife sliding between my ribs, slow and deliberate. I felt the sting of tears, but they didn't spill. Not this time. Pain had taught me control. Control had taught me patience, and patience had brought me here. Then I heard it, because Jack talked with his hands, and when he did, his voice carried. The window was thin, or maybe the universe just wanted me to hear the truth laid bare. He told her he was stuck at work tonight, that I never questioned anything, that I trusted him too much for my own good. I felt something inside me go very still, like the final click of a lock. I recorded every word, every lie, every smug little smirk he wore when she giggled and said he was too adorable when he got away with things. It was all there, the betrayal, the deception, the ease with which he twisted reality to suit himself. I didn't burst into the restaurant. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I simply turned away, walked to my car with steady steps, and sent the entire recording to my lawyer. No explanation. No message. Just the truth, raw and undeniable. The moment I hit send, something heavy slipped off my shoulders. Not the pain, not yet, but the helplessness. For the first time in months, I felt like I was no longer drowning. I was rising. I drove home before Jack even had a chance to finish his dessert. The house was dark when I walked in, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt intentional, like the perfect stage for the moment I'd been building toward. I placed the neatly organized divorce folder right in the center of the dining table, along with printed screenshots, time-stamped photos, and the transcribed audio from the recording I'd taken just an hour earlier. Evidence didn't need drama. It spoke for itself. I turned on one soft lamp, letting the warm light fall directly over the papers. Then I sat on the edge of the couch, calm, composed, waiting for the man who believed he was untouchable to walk into the trap he'd built with his own hands. He came home an hour later, humming a tune, actually humming, until he stepped inside and saw me sitting there. His smile faltered. He asked why I was awake, voice tightening just a little. I didn't answer. I just gestured toward the table. He walked closer, confused, then froze when he saw the stack of documents. I watched the blood drain from his face, watched his mouth open and close like he couldn't remember how to speak. He finally whispered my name, as if it could undo anything. Then he stammered something about explanations, about misunderstandings, about how I shouldn't jump to conclusions. But when he saw the photo of him kissing her outside the cafe, he stopped talking altogether. Silence fell between us like a final verdict. I stood up slowly, feeling a strange, unfamiliar steadiness in my legs. He reached for me, begged me to let him explain, said he'd been confused, overwhelmed, stupid. He asked me not to throw our marriage away over one mistake. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him he hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a series of choices that led him exactly here, standing red-eyed and trembling in the ruins he built himself. I told him I wasn't screaming, I wasn't pleading, I wasn't negotiating. I was done. And when I picked up my suitcase from beside the couch, I could see panic bloom in his expression. But I walked past him anyway, feeling lighter with every step. And as I closed the front door behind me, I realized something astonishing. I wasn't breaking. I was finally beginning. In the weeks that followed, my life felt strangely quiet, like someone had turned the volume down on the entire world. At first, the silence unnerved me. I kept waiting for the familiar chaos of heartbreak, the sobbing, the sleepless nights, the desperate urge to bargain with the past. But it didn't come the way I expected. Instead, the pain settled like a bruise, tender when touched, but no longer bleeding. I moved into a small apartment with soft lighting and a balcony that caught the morning sun. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it felt like mine. My space, my air, my beginning. Every morning, I'd sit with a mug of coffee, watching people hurry down the street, and I'd feel something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I started rediscovering pieces of myself I'd abandoned along the way. I went back to reading before bed, the way I used to in college. I signed up for a pottery class on a whim, letting my hands shape clay the way my heart was shaping a new version of me. I met up with old friends I hadn't had the emotional space for, letting their laughter and warmth stitch me back together. Even grocery shopping felt different, no longer a chore tied to someone else's preferences. I bought the cereal I liked, the candles that made me happy, the flowers I used to think were too unnecessary. I put them in a vase and realized they made my whole apartment smell like healing. Eventually, I reached out to Lily. We met for coffee at a little cafe with big windows and soft music, and when she hugged me, it felt like reconnecting with an anchor I didn't know I needed. She apologized again, even though she had nothing to be sorry for. I thanked her, not because her words hadn't hurt, but because they'd set me free. As we talked about life and old memories, I realized something vital. The world hadn't ended in that supermarket. It had simply shifted, revealing fractures that had been there all along. And now I was learning how to stand on new ground that was mine alone. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself breathing more easily, no longer carrying the constant weight of suspicion or the dull ache of betrayal. Therapy helped more than I expected. The first time I sat across from my therapist, I felt awkward, like I was supposed to perform grief, to prove I was hurting. But all she asked was, "How are you holding yourself together?" And for the first time, someone saw through the armor I'd built. I told her everything, how the supermarket encounter cracked my world open, how the nights beside Jack felt like lying next to a stranger, how revenge had become the only thing that kept me from collapsing. She didn't judge me. Instead, she helped me unravel the knots inside my chest, one truth at a time, until I could finally breathe without feeling like I was stealing air. Slowly, I started reclaiming my own rhythms. I cooked meals just for myself, choosing ingredients I liked instead of the ones Jack always preferred. I began walking in the evenings, letting the soft glow of streetlights and the hum of passing cars accompany me, while my thoughts untangled themselves. Sometimes I'd stop at a small park near my building and sit on a bench watching couples stroll hand in hand. Surprisingly, it didn't sting the way it used to. Instead, I felt something like hope, a soft, quiet promise that love wasn't the enemy. I had just given mine to the wrong person. I realized then that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a slow, gentle unfolding. One night, while organizing my new bookshelf, I came across an old photo of Jack and me from years ago. We looked young and bright, oblivious to the fractures that would one day tear us apart. For a moment, I felt a pang, a small human sadness for the woman I used to be, the one who believed love alone could hold a life together. But the sadness didn't drown me. It simply passed through, leaving behind a calm understanding. I hadn't lost a husband. I had lost a lie. And in its absence, I was finally beginning to meet myself again. Honest, steady, unbroken in places I didn't know could mend. A few months later, I realized something had shifted, not in a dramatic fireworks kind of way, but softly, like dawn slowly replacing the dark. I woke up one morning, stretched under my own blankets, in my own bed, in a space untouched by lies, and felt whole. Not perfect, not healed beyond recognition, just whole in a way I hadn't felt in years. I made myself breakfast while music played from a small speaker, letting sunlight spill across the kitchen floor. It struck me how peaceful the moment was, how ordinary and beautiful it felt simply to exist without the weight of someone else's deception pressing against my ribs. For the first time, I felt grateful, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced into my life. One afternoon, while sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, I watched the city move beneath me, people rushing to work, kids laughing on scooters, dogs tugging at their leashes. Life was still messy and imperfect, but it belonged to me again. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Jack, not at the blonde, not even at myself. Anger had carried me through the fire, but it wasn't meant to follow me into the future. What settled in its place was something softer: acceptance, dignity, a quiet confidence I'd earned the hard way. I'd survived the earthquake. I'd rebuilt from the rubble. And the version of me that emerged was someone I was genuinely proud of. Every now and then, I catch my reflection unexpectedly. Store windows, passing cars, bathroom mirrors, and I barely recognize the woman looking back. She stands straighter. Her eyes are clearer. Her smile is small but real, not stretched thin by pretending. And I think about all the nights I thought I'd never feel this again. This lightness, this self-trust, this forward motion. I won't pretend the scar is gone. Betrayal leaves its mark. But scars don't mean broken. They mean healed. They mean survived. They mean stronger. And as I step into whatever comes next, I do it knowing something I once doubted. Losing him didn't destroy me. It freed me.